So, hi everyone, and welcome to our latest Biome podcast with Emma and Robi.
Hello.
So, this week we are going to be talking about the Vaquita Crisis, which is something I think I mentioned this in the introductory video that we did introducing Biome, that this was something I felt very passionately about and wanted to raise awareness about as well, because a bit of a disclaimer, this is going to be quite a hard-hitting podcast, and we wanted to do this one now before
it's too late.
Before it's too late. That's a good way to put it, Robi.
Yeah. No spoilers, though.
So, for those of you who don't know what a vaquita is, that's fully understandable. Like, there's probably only 15 individuals at most left in the world, possibly less. And so they're very hard to see, they're very shy, very elusive. And so here on the screen you can see a picture of one. They're the smallest species of cetacean in the world. They're absolutely tiny.
Tiny things.
And they have the really distinctive kind of eye, dark mark around their eye as well. So they're only about 5 feet long, which is about 1.5 meters. So yeah, very, very small, and as well as being the smallest species of cetacean, they are also the most endangered marine mammal in the world. So I don't know, just to explain a bit more about cetaceans, Robi, do you want to kind of explain where they fit into the other groups?
Yeah, I'll put the vaquita in the context of whales then for you. So cetaceans are all whales and dolphins. They're split into 2 groups, the mysticetes, which are your toothless whales, and they've got this baleen, so stuff like the blue whale, humpback whale, they're the big filter feeders. And then you've got the odontocetes, which are the toothed whales. Within the odontocetes, you've got the sperm whale grouping, which go off in one direction, and then you've got the other grouping, which is beaked whales, the fantastically named beaked whales, who I think we may do another podcast on because they're so cool. And then the other main grouping is Delphinoidea, which has inside it all the dolphins, all the orca, all the narwhals and belugas, actually. And the vaquita is a porpoise, so that's a member of the family Phocoenidae. And there are only 7 species of porpoise in the world, which is interesting. They're quite hard to spot because they don't display at the surface. You know, they don't jump out the water like dolphins do. And they're generally quite small. So the vaquita is the smallest. I think the Dahl's porpoise is the largest, about 3 meters. So yes, the vaquita is a porpoise. Its genus name is Phocoena and its Latin name is sinus. So even though it is the most endangered cetacean in the world, it's not the only one in its genus. The harbour porpoise is in the same genus as it, but obviously as a species it is the most endangered. And it took that title after the extinction, probable extinction, but let's not kid ourselves, it's definitely extinct, of the baiji, the Chinese water dolphin. Water dolphin? River dolphin. All dolphins are water dolphins. The Chinese river dolphin. The loss of the Chinese river dolphin was an incredible blow in that it was the loss of an entire genus and an entire family, Lipotidae. So, the vaquita, incredibly endangered though it is, it's not the last of its genus, but it's an incredibly unique, it's genetically distinct, it's evolutionarily distinct, and it's entirely worth the protection that it's being given. So that's just placing the vaquita in the context of cetaceans. It's the smallest one, and it's the most endangered. And so, you know, there's a lot of sympathy I have in my heart for the vaquitas. These tiny little porpoises just swimming around, doing their thing, and there's, you know, I think less than 20 is probably the most accurate way of saying it. Or maybe even less than 10. Golly.
Yeah.
So yeah, what's happening with the vaquita? What is this crisis? Obviously, we know there's barely any left. How did we get to this stage? And, you know, why?
Yeah, and I think it's good to explain that. And so just to describe where this is happening in the world, this is in sort of the north of the Gulf of California, in the Sea of Cortez. So this is basically between mainland Mexico and Baja California, which is the sort of thin strip on the side.
The thin bit.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, so I guess there's a whole variety of reasons why they're so endangered at the moment, and they've basically been caught up in this massive kind of organised crime, corruption, poverty, violence, political conflict, greed, bribery. Like,
Oh
they're
my God.
kind of the key reasons why the vaquita is caught up in all of this. And it didn't used to be like this, which is very sad. It used to be an area that was just lots of local fishermen, very peaceful, very little crime. And then, as we're going to talk about, this whole illegal side of things started to kick off. And yeah, it's become quite dangerous.
Just to put their range into kind of context, you might think it's really odd, you know, these vaquitas, these tiny, tiny cetaceans, they've got the entire oceans to swim in. Why are they in this tiny, tiny portion of Baja California and the Sea of Cortez? And no one's really sure. Most porpoises do live in the northern hemisphere, but it's thought that the vaquita and the Burmeister's porpoise, which is its closest relative, and actually live normally south of the equator, moved north over the equator around 2.5 million years ago. At the beginning of the Pleistocene. So they've always been restricted. They've never had a big range. And actually, genome sequencing, revealed that ancestral vaquitas went through a very tight population bottleneck as well. So it's not so much a case of, as with the great whales, for instance, where there was loads and then we hunted them and now there's few. It's a case of there's always been a few, and now we're just really exacerbating that problem.
No, I think that's a good point to make. So possibly like range reduction is something that has occurred sort of naturally.
Yeah.
But then what's made it worse in recent years is kind of human pressures. So a big part of why they're so threatened is the use of gill nets. So what gill nets are, they've been described as like these walls of death, which is quite ominous. But it's basically this wall of netting that hangs down in the water column. And they're used by fishermen sort of for legal just fishing practices. And they're very cheap. And they can just haul these nets in. And the problem with them is that they catch so much bycatch that's unintended. So not only the vaquita, that's one of the main things that gets caught in them, but turtles, whales, dolphins, rays, sort of a whole plethora of species get caught in these nets. And kind of the reason for this, the way they work, so gill net, they work by sort of stopping fish from being able to escape based like on trapping their gills. So fish can go in, it gets their head stuck, but they can't go backwards. Or if they try to go backwards, it basically catches on the gills.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay.
So that is a big problem for vaquita.
And you can see on the screen now, this is what a gill net looks like. You can see it's this kind of mesh, and here you can see the fish has actually tried to go through, but as it comes back, the net has caught around its gills.
Yeah, so that it traps a lot of other species that it's not intending to. And so, there was some slight positive change with this. So in 2015, the Mexican president put an emergency ban on gill nets in the core vaquita habitat. So it's basically this exclusion zone where all legal fisheries weren't allowed to use gill nets. And there was some, I think not enough effort to provide alternatives and compensation to the fishermen, because they're massively losing out by losing these nets that they use.
And I guess the point there is all legal fisheries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think legal, let's get into the whole illegal realm. So the main kind of issue with the massive illegality of it all here is because of a fish called the totoaba.
The what?
Totoaba.
Totoaba. That's quite a good... I like that. It's a nice name for a fish. Totoaba. Great.
I like the name of it, and they're bigger than the vaquita themselves. They're 7 feet long, so pretty impressive fish. And they themselves used to be found sort of in schools in their hundreds or even more than that. But they are now critically endangered.
Right.
And the reason that they are sought after so highly, so they are now more valuable than gold.
Oh my God, why? It's just fish.
So, exactly. They are hunted for their swim bladder.
Their swim bladder?
Yes.
Right. So, to put that into context, A big division among fish is chondrichthyes, which is sharks and rays. They don't have swim bladders. They use their livers to regulate buoyancy. Osteichthyes are the other big group of fish, not including ourselves, because of course we are fish. I won't go into that. And they use a swim bladder, and it's essentially a modified organ within their body which controls their buoyancy. So it's how fish move up and down in the water column. If you've been swimming, we have to really struggle because we hold our breath and we've got all the air in us and we have to really kind of, struggle to get ourselves down. Fish do it with this organ called the swim bladder. Why do people want their swim bladders? Because they're literally just an organ.
I mean, that is a very good question, just to show you how weird this is. So what you can see on the screen now, this is a picture of a dried swim bladder. So It's kind of looks like a dried jellyfish. And this is what all the crime, the corruption, the illegal boat chases, this is what it's all about. That thing on the screen there that looks like a dried jellyfish.
Why? What's so good about it? What is that? I mean, what's the hype?
It's used in the Chinese medicine trade.
Right.
So it's the demand is coming from China, and so I think I've lost track of what ailments that the Chinese medicine says that it's supposed to cure.
I bet it's impotence. It's always impotence. It's always male sexual virility. It comes up, eat a dried tiger testicle and it'll make you have lots of babies. I'm like, what?
I think fertility is one of them on that list, but again, uses are extensive with very little scientific evidence to actually prove that it has any effect. But basically because of this swim bladder from this fish, basically you've got these Mexican cartels and Chinese mafia running this whole area in the Sea of Cortez.
Oh my God.
So it's just mass control basically under this mafia and this kind of war zone. And actually a couple of weeks ago there was a boat chase between an illegal fisherman and then the people trying to stop it, and the illegal fisherman actually collided with the boat and the boat split in two and he died. God. That was a couple of weeks ago, so this is very much still current and still happening.
But what I don't quite understand is, why would the Chinese medicine trade be interested in a fish from halfway across the world when, presumably this is... I can understand why they'd want tiger parts and rhino parts, because both of those animals used to live in Asia, and, they would have access and they'd build a mythology around it. But the totoaba is a fish from North America, which I assume that the Chinese didn't know about until a few hundred years ago, 300 years ago, 400? Why? And also, this tiny fish off Mexico, like, what's that about? Why is there a demand? I don't understand the link there.
I mean, to be honest, I don't fully either, and I don't with a lot of the wildlife trade links. I mean, I assume its range used to be a lot more extensive now, given that it's now critically endangered itself. But obviously, it does make you wonder, how did this start? Yeah. You've got this tiny area in the Sea of Cortez now, which is a war zone. So they've described the totoaba as the cocaine of the sea.
Oh my God.
So, the people in this local area no longer have to deal drugs with Colombia. There's no longer basically a drug trade, basically, because the totoaba is worth more than the drugs.
Oh my God. That's incredible. I mean, I suppose maybe it's a surrogate. Maybe there was a native fish species in the South China Sea, which is now depleted so much they thought, the totoaba is the next base thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's possible. Yeah, and possibly maybe because of the size, it's a very, very large fish. And then you can obviously have these, that, like you saw on the screen, the dried swim bladders, which can be shipped around the world.
Maybe it's a bit like tuna. They're so big, actually, even if you don't eat it, there's a lot of profit to be made from a single animal.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that they are worth more than gold just baffles me. It's a fish. But anyways, so what we were talking about with the gill nets being targeted to legal fishermen, this obviously doesn't apply to the illegal fishing, which happens at night, where fishermen will go out, they'll lay these gill nets designed for totoaba, and so it's still not, the problem hasn't stopped because it's so corrupt, and you've got the police who are basically being bribed not to report anything, so it's all a massive mess,
So
basically.
has there been any attempt at captive breeding, perhaps? It can work quite well in land mammal species. I know just in general cetaceans are very poorly suited to captivity. Anyone who's watched Blackfish would know that. Dolphins in aquariums rarely survive very long at all. But this is a crisis. They did try it with the baiji, the Chinese river dolphin, and it didn't work. It's working quite well, interestingly, in China with another porpoise-like species, the Chinese finless porpoise. I think 28 have been bred in captivity in this. Well, it's in an oxbow lake on the Yangtze River, so semi-natural captivity, and they're being bred there. But has there been any attempt with the vaquita?
There was a very large attempt. I mean, it's possibly one of the largest. I think it's been described as the largest operation ever conducted to try and save a marine mammal from extinction. It was a very big operation. You had the Mexican army, the navy, key scientists, vets, like the top of the end people in this field of research were there. And so it was led by a lady called Dr. Cynthia Smith, who basically the program was called Vaquita Cpr. And that's an acronym, but it was basically that it's the protection of these vaquita. And the idea was that they decided the Sea of Cortez was no longer safe from them, as you've probably began to gauge. Yeah. And
drug
so
lords
the plan,
running about.
Exactly. So the plan was to keep them all in basically these pens in the ocean in a sort of sanctuary type setting until the Sea of Cortez was safe for them again. So not a permanent thing, but just we need to get them out of the water now, otherwise they're all going to go extinct.
Yeah.
And they realised they can't be kept in captivity.
Wow.
They managed to bring one in, and it just became so unstable. These pens were well built, it was well thought out, but it just became very unstable. The breathing became unsteady. It stopped breathing and very stressed, and they weren't able to save it.
I suppose that might be the stress of capture, maybe?
Yeah. I would say, because they're so shy, they're so elusive, they rarely come into contact with people. And so possibly with less than 10 left in the world, they thought, we can't continue this. If one's already died trying with the best scientists and the best efforts in the world, they decided to abort the program instead, but then put efforts into other solutions.
And so it's telling that, they could only, even with all this, the Navy and the Army, they could only capture one individual. So is there like, what's happening on the other side then? So, okay, if we can't save the vaquita in itself, perhaps we can stop the problem. Has there been any attempt to end the illegal totoaba trade? Do we know who's running it? Can we essentially get rid of the demand instead of trying to save the vaquita outright?
I mean, I think that needs to be the answer if we are going to save the vaquita. So it becomes very challenging, though, because they know who's in charge of it in Mexico. It's a Mexican guy called Oscar Parra, and it's him and his family, and the police know who he is. Everyone knows who he is, but he has so much control that he's untouchable. So they know who he is. But there's a really, really good documentary called Sea of Shadows, which was produced by Nat Geo. And this is talking all about what they're trying to do to try to stop the demand. And a really cool way that they did this was a bunch of journalists got involved. So sort of key figures on Mexican television were going and interviewing police in this area and saying, hey, like, we've done some research into this. Oscar Parra, this guy at the top, why aren't you chasing him?
Yeah.
And like really putting pressure on the police. And then on mass Mexican TV being like, this is the vaquita, this is the problem, this is the totoaba. And so, I mean, they received death threats. It was very messy, but the idea that publicly raising awareness, and what I found quite clever that these journalists did, actually, they had a lot of undercover work. So they had people going in, talking to the Chinese dealers, talking to the Mexican dealers involved in this, and they basically compiled all this evidence, broadcasted it to TV, and then sent these documents to the respective governments of Mexico, US, and China.
And did anything happen?
Yes, with that it was positive, because if they'd just given the documents on their own to the governments, they could have just swept it under the table and pretended they never received it. But because it had been broadcasted, some of the Chinese traders in that area were prosecuted by the Chinese government.
That's good.
So that was positive. And then also one of the main bodies that's involved, which is still doing very positive work to this day, is sheep. This is tongue twister.
Is what, sorry? Sheep. I heard sheep.
Sea shepherd.
Sea shepherd. I've heard of sea shepherd. Yeah, they do some other stuff with whales as well.
Yeah, they're a big sort of non-profit marine wildlife group, and they have this big boat that is out in the sea of... Yeah, we love a big boat. And basically they are patrolling all the time in the Sea of Cortez. So their main weapon is drones.
Ooh,
so
interesting.
Whereas the illegal fishermen have actual guns, which they fire at Sea Shepherd regularly, it's very, dangerous. They use drones and they fly them out over illegal fishing boats and basically scare them away, because if they see they're being watched, they often cut the nets and leave. Sometimes there's a chase and there's shooting and stuff, but basically it's filming them, and then they go to that area where the net was left and they pull up the gill nets.
Okay, I was going to say, glad that they're pulling up the gill net.
That's a big thing. Every day they go out, they pull up the gill nets, and if they find a totoaba in the net, if it's alive, they just throw it back. If it's dead, they cut out the swim bladder and destroy it, because then it's of no use to anyone. But you can see why this would make the illegal fishermen very angry.
Yeah, that's that's money just going up in smoke. I suppose that's the same rationale behind the Kenyan government burning elephant tusk and rhino horn, because there's no value to it if it's smoke.
Yeah, exactly. But that same idea.
Yeah.
That it's basically them being out there all the time and then causing extreme. There's a big divide between sort of legal fishermen, sea shepherd, and the illegal fishermen. It's a big sort of conflict area.
It just kind of the mind genuinely boggles that all of this trouble for this one fish. I mean, and it's just astonishing that this is it kind of had to be that this whole war zone would happen in the one place where you've got this already small, bottlenecked population of tiny porpoises. So I assume this whole conflict with Sea Shepherd and the Totoaba illegal people and this Mr. Para and everything has been going on for some time now. So what is the situation now with the Vaquita?
I mean, so basically the Sea of Shadows documentary that was made, I think that it came out in 2019. So that was a pretty recent update of what's going on. And what we've been telling you now, this is the recent estimate of what is happening now, today, basically. So there was some attempts by the Mexican government in the past to kind of expand the protective zone. But like you've probably heard already, the government's saying they're going to ban gill nets, all very well.
Yeah.
The government's saying they're going to expand the protective zone, all very well. But when you've got illegal fishing activity on a mass scale with this mafia of this item that's worth more than gold, that's why you need people like Sea Shepherd, I think, to be out there on the front line patrolling. Otherwise, just words from the government aren't gonna do a lot.
And so has there been a lot of especially, so I'm just kind of thinking about wildlife poaching in Africa and India here, just because I'm seeing a lot of parallels. So the demand and the big cartels for poaching in for example, East Africa with rhinos, that's one side of the equation. But the poachers who are actually doing the poaching are by and large local people who, for them, this is their economic way forward. This is how they put their kids through school. It's how they feed their families. And, it's a very unenviable position to be in. If I was a father and I had children to feed and the option was nothing or poach a rhino and get enough money to put, see my daughters into education, I know which one I would pick. So is there anything happening with perhaps the illegal fishermen who maybe aren't, the lowest rung on the ladder, not the big Chinese cartels, not the big Mexican cartels, but the actual fishermen? Is there anything being done to kind of... a lot of the time in Africa you see poachers getting turned into game rangers, and that's a better source of income for them. What's happening with that?
I mean, I think sadly, often the illegal fishermen are very much victims themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So people like Oscar Para have so much control that there's money to be made in this industry. So once they are part of his sort of group, if they aren't making the payments to him, if they aren't catching totoaba, things like that, they threaten their family. One fisherman was even killed, one of the illegal fishermen, because he couldn't repay the money for the gill nets that Sea Shepherd had pulled up.
Oh my god! Wow!
But it was a loan, so he couldn't pay it back, and then he got killed. So there has been some attempts. So Sea Shepherd are working with legal fishermen and sort of trying to incentivize them that they are doing the right thing by sort of going out, helping them pull the gill nets. But these legal fishermen are having to travel often like 200 kilometers plus to be able to access safe fishing sites because they don't feel safe.
Wow.
That, like, it's all controlled. So I fully agree with you. It'd be nice if there was some incentive for the illegal fishermen, but just to show you how much control they have. So a group of illegal fishermen were arrested by the Navy as like a message to, you can't do this, this is illegal. All the illegal fishermen came together, mass rioted, they burnt down a load of Navy vehicles. Like, there was so much public pressure, they just let them all go.
Oh my god, you got the Navy, wow.
Yeah.
Blimey. So this is a massive, massive problem. And for the Vaquita as well, how many are left, do we know? I mean, the number I see a lot is below 20, just because I think that was the last survey, but that was a few years ago now, I think. Has it gone down?
The current estimate is 15 or less.
Right. So just to put that into context of why that low number is potentially so damning for this species, it's a concept we've talked about quite a lot on this podcast called an extinction vortex. So a lot of the time you might think that numbers are the key thing when it comes to saving a species, and obviously the more rhinos you have, the better. But that's not the end of the story. You also need diversity of genes. Diversity of genes gives you increased resistance to diseases. It gives you resistance to stuff like inbreeding. We see a lot at the moment about cheetahs. With even though there's comparatively a lot more than there are vaquita, they're actually got incredibly low genetic diversity, and so there are a lot of risk. If a single cheetah plague came through, almost all the cheetahs in the world would be at risk from that. So 15 animals or less is essentially this concept of an extinction vortex. They don't have enough numbers to increase their genetic diversity, and you might think, well, we can get 15. Well, if 7 of them are female and the rest are male, we can do something with that. But that's such a small gene pool that even 1 or 2 generations down the line, you get inbreeding. And inbreeding is, especially in already a population that's genetically bottlenecked, can be an absolute disaster. So the current outlook for these vaquitas is not particularly good, I don't think. On the one hand, the attempts to tackle the problem haven't been that successful. And now there are so few that even if the totoabas trade stopped tomorrow, the resulting population would be very severely genetically depressed. The other thing to think about is, 15 individuals, there's no guarantee that they will all be of breeding age. Some might be too old, some might be too young. If there's 15, that means they're already going to be inbred, and a key factor with inbreeding is that it reduces your reproductive capability. Perhaps they're just 15 males or 15 females.
I think there's so little known about them. We don't know their dynamics.
And what scares me is that we've seen this happen before with the baiji. It went from a pre-human interaction population of around 6,000. It plummeted for about a decade. We didn't know how many there were. There was 5 or 6. They captured one. It died very swiftly afterwards. I mean, there are so many parallels here. And the last autopsy they performed on one of the last baiji, they realised that, okay, this is an immensely inbred individual. Even if we had a mate for it, it probably wouldn't have succeeded. So what's really hard for me is the fact that we've seen this happen before. And again, with another little-known and genetically distinct cetacean. So that's the sad bit for me, I think. We've seen it happen before, and it's happening again now.
Yeah. No, I think that's the sad thing about this particular story, is that we obviously want to raise awareness about it, but like you say, there is a lot of parallels that maybe means it's heading towards a population that isn't viable. We said, they can't be kept in captivity. So it has been a case where there have been this few numbers, and through careful selective breeding, we've been able to bring species back, like the bison. But this isn't the case where when you can't keep them in captivity. It's very, very difficult. But I guess maybe to end on something more positive, because this is quite bleak, is that there are some amazing people who will fight to the very last vaquita to make sure that they are protected and to try and stop this illegal trade. So July the 18th, this year, I think it's July the 18th every year, but it was the International Save the Vaquita Day. And with COVID, obviously, usually there are big events they take to the streets, they raise awareness, and this year it was all online. So there is an 8-hour conference talk, like everything you could ever want about vaquitas, and that's on YouTube, so I'll provide the link to that. And after watching that, yes, I was filled with a bit of, this is such a big problem and it's very hard to solve, but also came away feeling more positive, knowing that there are some fantastic people doing everything that they can to save them. If anyone's going to save them, it's the people out there on the front line.
And again, something, if you perhaps don't have 8 hours to spare, but you still would like to watch something about this, Sea of Shadows, this Nat Geo documentary, is really fantastic. Quite hard-hitting, but really fantastic for opening your eyes. Just about the complexity of this issue. You've got Mexican cartels, Chinese cartels, the military, the navy, sea shepherd, fishermen, totoabas, these crazy fish. And let's not also forget that the totoaba is a victim in this crisis and is critically endangered. Perhaps not to the extent of the vaquita, but the totoaba is a species to watch and to conserve as well. Yeah.
No, absolutely. So hopefully you learnt something from that, maybe found out more about vaquita than you knew before. And yeah, please check. We're going to post all the links to this in the comments. And also, we want to know about your opinions as well. So feel free to let us know what you think. How do you feel about this issue?
How would you solve the vaquita crisis? You never know. You might have a fantastic idea, and you can pop it in the comments, and then you can go and save the vaquita. New ideas are always good. We've said quite a lot of doom and gloom in this episode, but if you've got any really innovative ideas, how to change gill nets, whatever, let us know. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you want more updates about podcasts, documentaries, things like that, you can check us out on YouTube. So that's the Grizzly Network. You can search for the Biome podcast. I think that's how you find us. And then
that is how you find us, for the record.
I get confused with all the names. Yeah. And then we are also on Instagram under Biome by Grizzly. And then if you wanted to check us out as well, me and Robi post cool wildlife stuff, and we raise awareness as well about topics like this.
And we've got badgers coming this year. Spring badger babies are going to be born, and we're going to be documenting it in our respective woodlands. So if you want to see some very cute badger cubs, which will be coming out very soon, check us out on Instagram.
Yeah, so it's local and global topics that we post about. So we are Emma Hodson Wildlife and Robi Watkinson Wildlife. So thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Bye.